Good morning to you. We are so happy to be back. This is Dan Beer and Todd Pianin happy to be back with you on this Sunday morning, as we always are. And we have an awesome lineup for you today. We're going to jump into things that you need to know. Now, listen up, because if you're serious about buying a house and you're going to go through the appraisal process, we're going to discuss the things that you need to know when selecting a lender and how that could affect your appraisal and how it could completely blow up your purchase if you don't know what you're getting into and how that process really works behind doors. We're also going to call for the end, or let's call it the death, of the listed and pray marketing plan. There's too much of it. It is too prevalent in the marketplace. And we're going to introduce something different called the 5-day blitz, and how that is a much more predictable path to getting your home sold in a timely fashion. And then, of course, we're going to jump into something that's affecting so many thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people here in this city, and it is the rising rents. Rents are out of control. They're rising. They're unlikely to come back. We're going to dive deep into the topic and work hard to save you money and help you make a more intelligent decision. But first, what the heck is going on in Baltimore?
I don't know what to say about Baltimore. I mean, what I can tell you is that, the good news is they just lifted the curfew on everybody, but I don't really understand what's going on with this whole incident and everybody kind of taking it way too far, way too quickly. The, police, obviously, we can tell that the police officer, he was arrested. He's obviously in the wrong on what happened here. But, I mean, Dan, they're burning buildings. They're burning their own buildings.
It's amazing. And this is Real Estate Exposed on News Radio 600 KOGO, and you rely on us for your real estate information. But this is a big deal. This affects our entire country. And here's the thing. Okay. So I'm not here to say something terrible happened or not. In fact, something did terrible happen. Somebody died.
Yes, it
But as far as something terrible in terms of conduct, I'm the type of person that needs to see that play out through our judicial system.
Yep.
I am not an expert in police conduct and procedures and in what this man's health was and what his physical conditions were. Those are things that I am personally not an expert on.
You weren't there when it happened either.
I wasn't there when it happened. I wasn't in Ferguson. I wasn't in all these multitude of places. So all I'm saying here is not that what happened was okay or justified or not. In fact, it was definitely tragic to see somebody's life lost like this, despite the fact that he had been arrested multitude of times.
18 times.
Okay, but that's one thing. But what does that have to do, being upset about the loss of his life, what does that have to do with taking to the streets and rioting and burning buildings and cars and so on?
In people's own neighborhoods.
It's unbelievable. And I don't want to see that happen. Look, it's happening too much across the country.
It could happen here.
Do you want to see that happen here in San Diego? Do you want to see that happen anywhere else? I don't. Okay. And here's one thing. Okay, I understand the public.
I think that that could happen. The Chargers move.
Yeah. Oh gosh, hopefully not. Don't let that happen. No, but seriously, like there's a response. One thing is for the public to go out and make these demonstrations, and let's admit it, just so many of the people out there, they're working on emotion. But for a celebrity to like Jada Pinkett Smith to use her platform that she's been given to say and inflame a society with the following quote. Listen to what she said and tell me if you think that this is responsible for a celebrity to say something like this. Quote, Jada Pinkett Smith, okay? Quote, "Don't give the very system that has been using violence to terrorize and exterminate us any justification to use that very violence upon us to keep us in order," end quote. Wow. I mean, that's a Molotov cocktail ready to just blow up an already inflamed society. And
which it has. I mean, Dan, I was watching the news the other night, and did you see how many buildings and how many cars and how many people were who were setting their own neighborhoods on fire? And did you see the interviews with these people with the people talking about why are we burning our own neighborhood?
It's unbelievable. It really is hard to take in how she could say something like that. It's just crazy. But this is Real Estate Exposed. with Dan Beer and Todd Pianin. Todd Pianin, one of the leading mortgage experts in San Diego County, and myself, the number one producing agent for one of the largest brokerages in town across all offices in the county. And so we're going to also dive into something else that's a little bit crazy, a little bit irresponsible. And that's if you're a home seller, here's 4 things that you don't want to do, okay? Don't do these 4 things if you are going to be selling your home, because it's going to cost you a lot of money.
4 things you don't want to do, Dan?
4 things you don't want to do.
So so you're going to expose some things that people are doing constantly.
Here's the deal. If you're thinking about selling a house, don't ignore a curb appeal. Okay, you've heard that. But I'm not going to apologize for being the broken record for bringing that back to you, because if you've been looking at a home anytime recently, you've driven up to homes where the yard isn't taken care of, where the paint is chipped, where I'm going to admit something to you right now.
Go for it.
Last week I was called out to a listing appointment. Mm-hmm. I drove up to the house, and it was so torn apart, just so bad in how it was put together, that I actually sat in my car for about 3 minutes,
right,
and drove out.
So you didn't even go into the appointment?
I drove away. Okay, so so can you imagine what the buyers are going to feel when they drive up to a house like that? Dress the thing up. Let's put things in perspective. You are selling a multi-$100,000 asset here in San Diego County, or possibly a multi-million-dollar asset. So give the thing some love, for God's sake.
You drove up and drove away and didn't even knock on the door.
Here's the next thing. If you're selling a house, make sure that your agent isn't crowding the buyer. Okay, so if you don't have an experienced agent, here's what most.
Can you explain crowding the buyer?
Yeah, here's what most agents will do typically. They, if they don't have a lot of experience, what they'll do is the buyer will come in, and they'll be in the kitchen, for example, and then the agent will go in and say, "Hey, that's the refrigerator, that's the dishwasher. They upgraded this in 1997."
You're not giving the buyer space to kind of just vision themselves living in the house and let them do their own thinking.
They're pointing out every nook and cranny. It makes the buyer uncomfortable.
But me as the seller, I want you to do that.
You don't. As a seller, you want me to just create an environment where the buyer is going to be able to really take in what your home is offering. Should they be interested, then they'll be interested in all of the little extras. Really quick, things number 3 and 4. Okay, don't offer that lived-in look. Clean the house up. Get rid of the clutter. It is no longer the home you're living in. It is now the home you're selling.
Stage
Put everything aside. By the way, everybody's staging their house. The question is, are you staging the house on purpose or by accident?
Let's bring a stager in here, Dan, and have them talk about it at some point.
We'll definitely want to do that. And part of that staging process is number 4. If you have odors in the house, if you have pets, dogs, smoker, etc., there's a lot of very specific steps that we can get in with you. And we can do this off-air as well. And that off-air number you could reach us at all week long is 858-356-2020. But there are very specific techniques you can go through to actually remove odors from your walls, from your window coverings, from your carpets. And it is critical. These 4 things on their own will swing, and I'm telling you, will swing the price of your home by tens of thousands one way or tens of thousands the other way. And so you're just going to want to be smart about that. We're live here in studio.
And what's coming up next?
We're absolutely live here in studio. We are going to be discussing appraisals and major mistakes that you can make when going into the appraisal process and how it could blow up your purchase. We're live. 800-600-KOGO is the phone number. And we'll be right back with you after. And we'll be right back. Good morning to you. You're listening to Real Estate Exposed with Dan Beer, Todd Pianin. And Todd is our mortgage professional. So, Todd, being my mortgage man, I want to understand let's talk to the listeners about the major mistakes that can happen with the appraisal process, how that, just all the misunderstood things around appraisals and how it can blow up a purchase for the buyer.
It can blow up a purchase and it can blow up a refinance. So let's talk about one story I have for you about appraisals. One is a big bank went out and appraised a property. The property was in Del Mar. The appraiser came from National City, did not even know the area. They showed up 20 minutes late. The because they had no experience in the neighborhood. Basically, when the appraisal came in, it came in, I would say, probably $150,000 under value of what it should have came in for, because the appraiser was not used to or worked in that neighborhood, didn't even live in the neighborhood, didn't even know much about Del Mar because they lived out in National City. They drove an hour and a half. They don't do a lot of appraisals in that neighborhood. And here's one of the things that people don't realize is a lot of the big banks use appraisals as a source of revenue. Last year alone, I can tell you one big bank made over $300 million in profit just on their appraisal department. And so one of the little known truths or little known facts is that you want to make sure that that you're using an appraiser who knows the neighborhood, who knows the sales, who works in the neighborhood.
Hold on, but didn't Dodd-Frank prevent the system, to prevent lenders from being able to select the appraiser?
They did. Dodd-Frank is a rule. It was a legislation that came out of out of Congress after the mortgage crisis. And one of the things that it prevents us from doing is it prevents a lender from speaking with the appraiser direct. You have to use what's called an AMC, which is basically a company that hires appraisers. And we can talk to the AMC company, but we cannot talk to the appraisers direct.
Okay, so they just put in like a layer of space between the two of you.
Correct, protection. But you need to make sure that your lender is using an AMC. Like we at Samuel Scott Financial Group, one of the things that we do is we use an AMC that only will hire appraisers who live and work in the zip code where the property is being appraised at.
And you're listening to Real Estate Exposed here on News Radio 600 KOGO, and we are live in studio. If you want to call in and talk about this with Todd and I, that phone number is 800-600-KOGO. So, Todd, you're able to select this AMC.
Yes.
And so you have an understanding of what AMCs have appraisers that have best understandings of different parts of town?
It's not that. We just picked we picked an AMC, which is a company that does appraisals, that hires appraisers, and they actually make money on the backs of the appraisers. But what we do is we made sure that we hired an AMC that when they check who they're going to use for an appraisal, that it's an appraiser who either lives and works in the area that they're appraising.
So for the consumer listening right now that's about to go into a purchase or maybe even just went under contract
or refinance, which is very important.
What is the difference then between going through this process with a company like a direct lender like you have, a mortgage banking institution like you have, versus one of the large banks, the B of A's of the world, the Citibanks of the world?
So what happened with Dodd-Frank was all these big banks like the B of A's, the Wells Fargo's, they decided to create their own AMCs, and they wanted to be able to make money on their appraisals, even if they don't do the loans. And so they don't really care. And on top of that, they may charge you, the consumer, $600-800 for your appraisal. But do you realize that on a $600 or $800 appraisal, that the appraiser is probably only getting about $175 on that appraisal? And they're spending a truckload of time, a truckload of work, and that's why you'll get appraisers from outside areas to drive in to do an appraisal because on a property in Del Mar when they live in National City, because they don't really understand. They just want to make their $175.
Wow. So if you're in the process right now of getting into a purchase or refinance, do you think it's right that aside from all the interest that they are going to make on you, aside from the years of payments you're going to make from to the bank, that even the appraisal will be a source of profit to one of the bigger lending institutions like the B of A's and Citibanks of the world?
Citibanks, Wells Fargo's.
Do you think that's right? How does that make you feel? And you're very welcome to call us here live in studio at 800-600-KOGO. This is Real Estate Exposed. So, Todd, how is that right? How does the public not know about this?
Because most people don't talk about it. It's something that's not talked about to the investor. It's not talk to the buyer. It's not talked to the seller. It's not talked to the realtor.
So aside from the profit that's going to be made by this banking institution, how can this actually affect the quality of the appraisal? What consequences can that have? When we have a buyer just trying to get into the home that they've worked so darn hard to get into, what just how can things go right and then things go wrong? Can you paint that picture for us?
Sure. So an appraisal comes in under value on a purchase transaction. For the sake of argument, you're the listing agent, Dan. How do you go back to the seller of the house and say, hey, appraisal just came in, guy from National City, I'm selling you a home in Del Mar. He brought in the appraisal $100,000 less than what we sold it to our buyer for. So now the buyer believes that they're overpaying for the house by $100,000. You, as the realtor, are going to have to convince your seller that they're overpaying for the house for overpaying for the house because supposedly a third party appraisal service is telling you that the value of the property was worth less.
Yeah, here's the one thing that just gets me on appraisals. Okay, this drives me bananas because it's just so illogical on some levels. Now, I do understand why appraisals exist, and I do understand that we have to protect that innocent home buyer or home seller that's out there that's going to be taken advantage of it, in some kind of way in some rural part of town where there's very little liquidity in the marketplace, where it's just hard to put a finger on value. And I understand the spirit behind the appraisal, and it's well intended. But here is what gets me, and tell me if this gets you. You're selling a home, and your buyer has now looked at every home that's for sale in your area, in your neighborhood. Their agent is educated. Your agent is educated. You come up with value. You negotiate. You agree to it.
Right.
And I'll tell you, and so you make a deal. You make a deal. Both parties are happy. And in comes an appraiser that drives over to the house from who knows where, doesn't even know the neighborhood, has to punch the address into the GPS, for God's sake, because they don't know the place, and then shows up and tells you that the value you agreed to is $10,000 off. Really?
Really?
$10,000 off?
Really?
$10,000 on a home value of, let's say, $620,000. And I'll ask you this question. What is the exact value of your house? The exact to the penny dollar value of your house? Newsflash, there is none. There is no exact penny value to your home or any other home.
Correct.
The best appraiser in the world is the buyer that's been traveling the neighborhood, going home to home to home. Your agent that's an expert in what you're selling. The other buyer's ex-agent who's an expert. When all those parties are happy, how can it be that somebody drives in from who knows where and at times says, no, sorry, your value's off by $5,000?
Well,
$5,000?
Well, it's economics 101, right, Dan? we learned that in college, and I think a lot of us learned that as well. That basically they you have a buyer and a seller, and they're the ones who are going to dictate what the purchase price is, right? Supply and demand. That's what's going to tell us, not somebody who lives in a faraway city that's coming to appraise in a house in a city that's not that they don't live in or work in. They can't. How do they tell a buyer or a seller what their house is worth?
And I understand it. I understand it if the home is truly, in that 620 range. Let's call it, might have sold for 615, might have sold for 620, 625, because that's how homes sell. They sell in a particular range. That's why one neighbor sells for one number and the next neighbor sells for a slightly different number.
Right.
There is no exact penny dollar, value.
Right.
But so I understand if that appraiser comes in.
But I will tell you, Dan, that 90% of the time when you're using the right appraisal, you're going to get somebody who's going to bring in the value.
Absolutely,
value.
And that's the whole point of this: is you want to work with a lender that understands how to that has the right working relationships. We're gonna go here to a caller. You're live on air. Oh, it looks like we've dropped them. It looks like we've dropped the caller, so no problem. We're gonna come right back here. But that if the value had come in, let's say $100,000 under value, so it's clearly a 620 value, and it comes in at 500.
Right.
I understand that.
Right.
But boy, to see a home seller who's trying to desperately get their family to Arizona because of a job opportunity or because of whatever is going on privately in their life, and a buyer that's trying to shift into whatever neighborhood they want to live in because it's just time for them to make that move, and both of these families have geared up and decided that now is time to do it. And then to see somebody come in.
Lose a deal just over an appraisal.
And over an opinion. That's one man's opinion.
Yes.
The marketplace said that the price was $620.
Correct.
One man's opinion was that the price was $615.
Right.
So it's just really unbelievable thing. So what specific steps, Todd, can our listeners take to prevent that from happening to them?
When you're talking to your bank or whoever you're working with, your mortgage bank or whoever or the bank you're using, make sure they're using an appraisal company that basically is going to tell you that they're going to use an appraiser who appraises in that zip code.
You're going to want to get in touch with my man Todd Pianin at Samuel Scott Financial. He is one of our preferred lenders for a reason. Trust me, our phones ring off the hook all week with people with lenders out there that want to meet us, want to have lunch with us, etc. And I'm telling you that there's a very specific reason that we trust our clients in the hands of Todd and his team. So if you want to get in touch with him anytime off air, that number's 858-356-2020. That number's good all week long. Again, that's 858-356-2020. And we are live in studio. This is Real Estate Exposed. That phone number you can call us here at is 800-600-KOGO. And coming up next, we're going to be talking about we're going to call for the death of the listed and pray marketing plan. It is too wide, too prevalent, too much used, and instead we're going to introduce what we call the 5-day blitz. Be right back. Hi, you're listening to Real Estate Exposed. Good morning to you, and we are going to jump into one of my very favorite topics here on News Radio 600 KOGO, live in studio. Phone number is 800-600-KOGO. And we do welcome all callers, whether you agree with us or not. We welcome the phone call, and we'd love to have you live here on air.
So, Dan, you're going to give us kind of like your marketing plan or your listing presentation?
No, absolutely not. I would never give that off here on air. But I am going to call for something. I am going to call for something that is deep and very important for anybody. For if you're thinking about selling your house, you have to listen to this, okay? Because I'm calling for the death of the list it and pray marketing plan. I'm going to repeat that. I am calling for the death of the list it and pray marketing plan. It is too wide, too much used, just too common in the marketplace, and it is not serving you as a seller.
What is list it and pray, Dan?
So here's the deal. If you've sold a house before, I bet the process looks something like this. You hired an agent. Okay, you interviewed an agent, hired them. They took pictures, maybe professionally, maybe not. And that's just a whole source of laughter onto itself, because it's just incredible how much unprofessional photography is out there, and why you would pay your agent to do something like that is beyond me. But so anyhow, I digress. You hired an agent. They took pictures. They slapped them on the multiple listing service on the MLS, and they prayed that somebody would make a phone call, set an appointment, and write an offer. I mean, that's the process. I realize I'm dumbing it down here a little bit, and some people do it better than others. Some people dress it up more than others do, and put some bells and whistles on it. But at the end of the day, isn't the grand majority of the home selling experience you've had out there reflected something to the effect of pictures were taken, they were put online, and then you waited for phone calls to come in for people that wanted to look at your home, and you allowed John, the realtor, to show your home on Tuesday at 1 o'clock. Then you allowed Betty, the realtor, to show your home at Thursday at 10 a.m. because those were the times when they wanted to show the house. And then you simply prayed that an offer would come in. And that was the process. Rinse, repeat, do that for if you're lucky, do that for weeks at a time. If you're not so lucky, do that for months at a time until you finally get that offer and sell the house, if at all.
But the market right now, you talked about the inventory is low. So list and pray, explain why that wouldn't work in a very low inventory market.
So that's the process that every agent's going through out there. And think about why. Think about the why behind that is what you're very likely to get from the grand majority of agents that you would interview. And it's simple. You get, Put yourself in the shoes of a newly licensed agent. Take yourself back to that agent's day one in the industry when they got their license and then said, oh, holy smokes, okay, I have my new career. What do I do? How do I sell a house? And what do we do, which is natural human behavior? We observe. We look around, we observe, and we tend to observe the people that came before us and maybe are having some success, and we see what they're doing. And what they're doing is they're photographing homes, they're putting them online, they're conducting showings and waiting for that offer to come in. So then you start doing that. And by you, I mean, the rhetorical you here, the newly licensed agent. And so then that person starts doing it. Most won't have success because it's very much a 95-5 business, meaning that 95% of the activity is really being conducted by something like 5% of the agents. But in any case, that's what they're doing. So they're essentially just mimicking the generations and generations of agents that have come before them, all doing a relatively, similar process with a little bit of different bells and whistles, some with better photography, some with worse, some sprinkling in some staging, some not. But at the end of the day, all of them going through that process. And here's why it is ineffective. When you go through that and you're giving everybody these individual showings, that buyer that's in your house, well, guess what? They think you're there. They're your only buyer. They don't see their competition. What if you were at the store? What if you were at Nordstrom and you were the only person in the store? Would it feel good to you to go ahead and pay $200 for a pair of jeans?
I wouldn't pay $200 for a pair of jeans if I'm the only one in the store. No way.
Or yeah, you'd think to yourself like,
what's going on with this place?
This can't be worth it. Yeah. This must be overpriced. This must not be right. Nobody else wants it. Why am I the only one that does want it? And it just wouldn't feel right to go ahead and pay full retail. But you walk into Nordstrom, and it is loaded with people.
It's hustling and bustling.
Hustling and bustling, right?
Yep.
It's loaded with people. Everyone's trying on the jeans. Everyone's looking at them. Everyone's, there's just all kinds of activity.
Makeup counters, shoes everywhere. I mean, it's craziness to go into that place sometimes.
Yeah, and they know how. And so that psychologically creates a different effect for you, where you're more likely to pay the price because you have the social proof of all your peers that you perceive to be there as well. So what we've implemented into our business, and this is Real Estate Exposed with Dan Beer, the #1 agent of Windermere Homes and Estates across all offices in San Diego County, and my man right here, Todd Pianin, our mortgage professional and expert. What we have done on our team is implemented what we call the 5-day Blitz marketing program. And it is a process that actually pulls this whole thing upside down. And instead of mimicking what all agents before us have done, we're actually mimicking and copying what the big home builders do, what the Toll Brothers of the world do, the Standard Pacifics and the Pulte Homes. And if you think about what they do in very basic terms, and we're always happy to discuss this further with you off air at 858-356-2020, only because we don't have enough time here. What is basically done is that those big builders that have all the marketing budget in the world to put together just the right process. Okay, so it's not an accident that they go through this process, is that they stage a model. They may look amazing. They win the battle of visual appeal. They build an interest list. They reach out to all of their channels, all through their database, all of the relevant agents. They build an interest list using their resources. And then they funnel that interest list into a grand opening event where they have everybody there all at once. And guess what? A good portion of their inventory sells immediately. And it is a very significant shift in psychology when the buyers are all there together and realize that they're not the only show in town. And we're happy to speak more to you about that. That number is 858-356-2020 to reach us off air, or we're live here in studio on News Radio 600 KOGO. That phone number is 800-600-KOGO. And coming up next, we're going to be discussing a major issue that's affecting so many of you, and that's the rising rents here in San Diego. How to get out of that if you're renting, and how to take advantage of it if you're an investor. And you're listening to Real Estate Exposed here with Dan Beer and Todd Pianin. We're going to jump into rising rents on News Radio 600 KOGO. Todd, there are rents in San Diego County are rising at a rapid pace. In fact, the Marcus and Millichap report on rents came out, and what they found was that rents are up in San Diego County by 5.3% over a year ago. That's a pretty significant jump. Huge, and a huge jump that you're excited about if you're an investor out there. But if you're renting, like so many people in San Diego renting, and then you may have recently come home to a notice on your door that said that your rent's going to pop $100 a month.
Well, it could be somebody. I think an average rent for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath in San Diego County is something like $1,895 a month. Does that seem right, Dan?
It is right about there, and it's just, I mean, that is a lot for when you take into account the cost of everything else in people's lives. You know, Todd, as a mortgage professional, 30% is what I've heard. 30% of your take-home income is what should be spent on your living expense, whether that be rent or mortgage. Is that a good guideline?
I would say 30 to 35%, yes.
30 to 35%.
Because you get the tax savings on the interest deduction when you're renting a house. So the actual number after tax is probably more closer to 20% after you've owned the house for a year.
And I'm seeing a lot of sales even that we're doing on our team where we're taking people that are renting a house or renting an apartment and are actually keeping the same payment, or in some cases dropping their payment.
Yep.
And on their purchase versus what they were doing when they were renting, because guess what, it's this is not a news flash, right? If you're listening and are renting a home or an apartment, do you believe that your landlord is doing it as a service to you, as a community service, because they just want to give you affordable housing? Or is it a business that you are helping them profit from because they are making money? They are making more on your rent than they do on what it costs them to have the loan for the property.
Or they may own it free and clear. But a lot of people don't realize that when you rent a property, well, they do. You put down first, last, and a month's security deposit. And if you have an animal or something else, they may ask for even more money. And a lot of buyers out there are unaware that you can get into a home with as little as 3.5% down on the purchase price, up to loan amounts in the mid to upper $500,000 range.
So here's a question: what keeps you? If you know that you're paying rents in one of the highest rent markets in San Diego, or in the country, excuse me, which is San Diego County, and you know that there are very affordable loan programs out there with something as like 3.5% down,
right?
What keeps you? And I'd love for you to call in here on Real Estate Exposed. The phone number is 800-600-KOGO. What keeps you from putting a plan together to get your first purchase done? And I realize I say that sensitively because I understand how tight it is out there. I understand just how hard it is to save. But I am a very strong believer that we make do with what we have. And if you put together a savings plan that's going to pinch off just a little bit each month and do that over time, at some point, you're going to be the person that's paying yourself rather than paying somebody else, and it's never too late to start that process. And better said, possibly, it's never too early to start that process because, Todd,
there's a lot of myths out there too, Dan. You realize you can borrow money from your 401k to buy a home and not pay a penalty. So money you've been saving, that you've been putting away in sort of your retirement plan, you can actually borrow, and you can use that towards your 3.5%.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and so the good news is you get the tax deductibility, on top of it. So you're borrowing from yourself to buy something that is going to be able to increase in value. So I think that one of the questions I have for a lot of people out there who are renting is why are you not even looking to see what your payment would be? A lot of people, I think, are frightened and scared that they think that they're not going to have they don't have enough money for a down payment. So and that's a great question, Todd. And I think here's what I hear from some of our first time buyers that we help get over that hurdle. Is they honestly just didn't think they could do it. It's tight.
But here, I'm gonna give all the listeners, I'm gonna give you my favorite book recommendation, and it's a book called The Richest Man in Babylon. And if you just read that precious little book, it is such a small. It will not take you long at all. You'd be surprised how small this book is, but it has all the wisdom, all the money wisdom in the world. And if we could help you put a plan together for you to even make a purchase 2 years from now, now's the time to reach out to the mortgage professional that's going to help you structure that. And getting in front of Todd or anybody that you trust out there, it's definitely the right time to do that. And we're going to go to Justin. Justin, you're here live in studio with us. What's going on, man?
Actually, Jefferson. And I'm calling actually for a couple of questions. First one is I heard you talking about how a lot of people will want to put money away but have trouble. And I'm kind of in that situation. And my wife agrees with you on the paying people's mortgage thing.
Sure.
She doesn't agree with you when it's like, for some reason, she thinks like a person who owns a house is a little more genuine than a person who owns an apartment complex. I'm trying to convince her there's no difference.
Can you describe what is genuine? What does that mean?
Just basically, she thinks that like apartments are a big business. They don't care about us. The opposite. A person who owns a house is more likely to screw us over than an apartment complex.
So what you're saying is so to validate the process of renting. She's saying that she would feel better renting in an apartment complex than in a house.
Comfortable.
Yeah. So here's my question for you, Justin. Do you think that the people that have invested into that apartment complex versus the people that have invested into the house have distinctly ulterior motives, or are they both looking to maximize their investment? And let me say this. Neither of them, in my opinion, is looking to screw you. That you could have a wonderful landlord who owns a house that you're renting from. You could have a wonderful apartment building operator that treats you very, very well.
Yeah, we've been encountering. We just recently moved to San Diego County. We encountered a lot of slumlords where we used to live as a less desirable area. But my second question is the job history for me. Like I haven't had a really good job history. I've had jobs and everything, but it's like working for myself. And I'm actually just going to be starting a new job where I'll have a job trail, but I'm worried about that. My wife's got a good job trail. We're getting ready to come into a little bit of money where we want to put it down on a house.
That's awesome. But
I'm worried about job history.
Yeah, and good for you to be thinking about that. And somebody like you specifically, and just like me, Justin, you and I are very much the same in that, I'm a self-employed person, and you'd always been, your job history, it sounds like, was not always your typical W-2 type income. So yeah. Somebody like you, somebody like me, you want to get in front of a lender as soon as possible. And it may be, here's the real thing. It may be that they'll tell you that you can't do it yet, but that you can do it if you maintain your current work program for X amount of time, that you can do it if you pinch off a certain amount of income towards savings every single month, and that you will then be set up to do it, let's say 6 months from now or 8 months from now. And so for those reasons, if you believe you want to be a buyer 6 months from now or whatever time frame is in you're targeting, you want to put that plan in place now, because what's going to happen if you don't, 6 months from now you'll say, honey, it's finally time to go buy a house, and then you'll go get in front of your lender, and it could turn out that you're 6 months behind in planning. So I definitely suggest that you get that process going now.
Okay.
And we'd be more.
I did hear you mention your book,
The Richest Man in Babylon. I highly suggest that you go get that book. And here's a basic principle you want to take from it. It's just like anything else. Okay, think of yourself in high school when you had a month to complete a project. Well, guess what? That project took you a month to complete. But if you had been given 2 weeks to complete that very same project, it would have taken you 2 weeks to complete it. Yeah. So if you're living on X amount of money, if that's what you're earning and you're living on that, what's really interesting about human nature, even though it may seem like you need every penny of it, is that if you actually pretended like you didn't have, let's call it 10% of that, and just shifted it away somewhere and made do with living with that rest of that 90%.
Yeah, living within your means.
Absolutely. Human nature has it. And Justin, thank you so much for the call. We're going to kick you back to our producer so we could take your information, maybe give you some help to put a plan in place. But human nature just has it that you're then going to still be able to live your life with that 90%, build that savings plan, and get yourself into a house just like you want. And so this it's just a big deal. The rents are definitely rising. They're not going to go the other way. And it is time for more people like Justin to take action and get that plan in place.
But a lot of people don't realize out there that there are programs that we can get them into, even starting a new job.
Even starting a new job, that's why you want to start the planning process early. I mean, for that very reason. For that very reason. So this is Real Estate Exposed. I'm Dan Beer with Windermere Homes and Estates, and Todd Pannon at Samuel Scott Financial. We had a beautiful morning with you. Have a great one.